Beautiful synesthetes, welcome to Chromatic Minds. This time we have a special guest. I assume that most synesthetes recognize this one, this wonderful guest that we have here. So of course we have the lovely James. James was born in Manchester in the United Kingdom. He presently lives in the quiet Norfolk countryside, and he has been the president of the UK Synaesthesia Association, known as UKSA, since 2006, and is also the vice president of the US-based International Association of Synesthetes, Artists and Scientists, the IASAS. James is one of the first individuals in the UK to have this synesthetic experience studied and recorded, and has appeared in over 100 published research papers worldwide, and has been actively involved in synesthesia research over the 2 decades. Wow, this is so. We have a indeed very special synesthete with us today. James, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. That was a nice intro. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. James, you have an interesting synesthesia yourself. It's a lexical-gustatory one. If you'd like to elaborate a little bit about that, because our podcast today, our interview today, is focusing on something entirely different than our personal perceptions of reality. This time we're going to talk about the history of synesthesia, which is something a lot of synesthetes had asked me about, and they show a lot of interest in.
Yeah, my particular strain of synesthesia, or flavour, as I like to call it, it's sound to taste synesthesia, or lexical-gustatory synesthesia, which means that every sound I hear, and especially word sounds, that must be something that emanates from childhood, you know, when I was learning language, but certainly every word sound carries with it a unique and specific taste, and these tastes and flavours are very, very specific. There's also temperature involved in it. Mouthfeel, because there's volume there, so it's the whole gamut. It's not just an association, it's a genuine mouthfeel. That's the fascinating thing I find anyway. Where the hell does that come from?
Indeed.
Yeah, and it's something that, like most synesthetes, you'll know this already, it's something that I've experienced for as long as I can remember. I first picked up on it when I was aged around about 4.5, 5 years old. When I was learning to read and write, I used to write things down and stick down the flavours that were associated with the words as well. My mum used to pick me up on it, saying, "What does that mean?" And I tried to explain it as best I could as a 5-year-old, because it's quite a difficult thing to try and elucidate on as a kid, but she accepted it, which was rather nice. My father didn't accept it at all, though. He thought I was a bit batty and had an overactive imagination and was making it up for attention, which hurt a bit. But my mum supported me totally with it, and she in fact had synesthesia herself. She didn't even realise until probably 10 or 15 years after I was talking about it that she had something similar, because she saw days, or experienced days of the week in different colours, which explained why she always went out in green stuff on a Tuesday and blue stuff on a Wednesday. She used to dress according to the colour of the day of the week. And it was something that was natural to her. She didn't really pick up on the fact that it was different.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I can relate to that too, because I also have the visual space synesthesia, and I choose to dress based on the perfume that I'm wearing. So today I'm wearing red because I'm wearing a very red perfume. I don't think many people know this one. It's called Tilia by Marc Antoine. I forgot his name, but the perfume Tilia. So it's a very red color for me, and I'm wearing red today, so I can totally relate to that. You know, I really love the fact that you kept, as a child, you were documenting your synesthesia, which is amazing. And I think it really relates to what we're going to discuss about today, because I believe that it's thanks to synesthetes like you that have put extra, emphasis and attention to the synesthesia from a young age. This is how we got the beautiful thesis that Sachs wrote, Georg Tobias Ludwig, Sachs. He's an Austrian albino that this wrote a whole thesis about him and his twin sister condition as being as albinos, but he has a whole chapter there dedicated to his synesthesia, which took a lot of interest. And I think what makes this documentation especially unique is that it's the first time that a synesthete describe what he sees and not other people trying to describe synesthesia. And this is what makes you become more interested in this phenomenon and understanding how this man sees his reality through his eyes, through his ears. What is that about?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's fascinated me because a lot of the certainly researchers that I knew back in the early 2000s and late 1990s, none of them were synesthetes. And I used to sit there thinking, why are they don't understand this? They've got no way of understanding it because they don't experience synesthesia themselves. But and the other thing as well was, do we really need $1 million machines like fMRI scanners to tell us we've got synesthesia? We don't, because we know we've got it.
Yeah.
All of that research, though, has played a part, especially research from non-synesthetes as well. But what we're seeing now is a lot of researchers are synesthetes, and they're actually coming out with doctorates in synesthesia, which is a fascinating development. And that's relatively recent.
That's amazing. I think it is the best way for us in the States also to have someone that speaks our language, but also for researchers to really get a glance of what it feels like. Before that, before Zach's, what other researches or stories you have heard about? You also mentioned that the study of synesthesia goes all the way to ancient Greek.
Again, I can kick this off by saying that there is no reason to think that synesthesia hasn't existed throughout all of human history. The issue we've had here is we just lack, early written records to make a reliable determination that synesthesia did exist. But what does exist is lots of little pointed references to synesthetic traits, or at least traits that we as synesthetes would recognize. And scientific and philosophical research and debate into synesthesia, as you point out, certainly isn't new. And you're right, the ancient Greek philosophers were very interested in the subject, or at least the concept of coloured hearing, for example, and whether the colour of music was a physical quality that could be quantified. They were very interested in that. There are lots of variants of the term synesthesia that appear in a number of texts produced by the ancient Greeks, mostly in Latin and stuff, and Latin scholars as well. Some would say, in a variety of unrelated contexts, which is probably right, because the Greeks, as you may well aware, are very limited concept of colour. I think there's only about 4 or 5 colours that they recognised.
Yeah, bronze, I think. One of them was like I think the colors were bronze, silver, white, black. It's not, the spectrum of color that we have today, obviously.
No, I think there was a limitation in language, I think, more than anything else. That's probably what the issue was. But really, I suppose, the certainly the references I've seen, and I try and pick up on as many as I can, there's certainly very few that reference synesthesia as we understand it today. Obviously, we're enlightened today, and we've got modern kit and modern language to describe what we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, for the most part anyway, such debate regarding synesthesia tended to be initiated by artists and musicians, of which there were plenty, with the occasional philosopher thrown in. And you've mentioned as well, it wasn't until 1812, and that's quite a large time span, 1812 until the first verifiable documented case of synesthesia was recorded and published.
Yeah.
But having said that, prior to that, there had also been a number of other potential cases of synesthesia recorded in various contemporary texts. I actually dug this out today for you to have a look at. It's I don't know if you can
Wow.
see that. It's a book and it's entitled An Essay on the Human Understanding. You've probably heard of it before. It's by the Oxford University academic and philosopher John Locke. Now,
Mhm.
this thing was written in 1689.
Wow.
Absolutely fascinating, tiny writing. You can hardly read it. But in this, there's a passage in this where he reports a blind man describing the colour scarlet as being, yep, like the sound of a trumpet. Again, one of the arguments against John was that maybe it was more related to the use of metaphor, but personally, I think not. I've gone through this book a number of times,
Mhm.
and there's quite a few passages in here, that scream synesthesia. There's a passage in there that suggests we might taste, smell, and see by the ears. There's
Wow.
a passage in there that says sound should be visible
Wow.
or colours should be audible. And there's even a part that's relevant to my own synesthesia where he says, the actual quote is, let him try if any words can give him the taste of pineapple. Uh,
Wow.
you can't get more specific than that. And as I said, this was written in 1689.
Amazing.
We've also, I mean, I've also seen, and again, you're probably aware of this, 17th, 18th century physicist Isaac Newton, he of the law of motion and gravitation. He believed that musical tones and coloured tones have frequencies in common, and that there might be some physical laws connecting colour and music.
I know. And the whole music system, the way that they write, especially for infants, so when you study the music theory, it's very colorful. And I'm always thinking to myself, is do colors really exist somewhere that we can see them? That do frequencies, can we see their actual colors? And maybe this is what we see. Maybe all these people that you just mentioned right now experienced also a
Yeah,
form of synesthesia themselves, if they were intrigued by it. And
yeah.
and this
Well,
because and describing it, because asking someone if they can smell um when someone says something and they would smell or taste pineapple is very specific.
well, yes. Well, I mean, Newton himself, I think it was called the Treatise of Optics. He assigned each colour of the rainbow to a note of the major scale. And really, I suppose that acts as an illustration of the long history. This is dating back to Greek antiquity of interest in the relationship between colour and music. It's
Hmm.
always been there, always been there. Excuse me. The thing that, as I said, I've been researching, I'm looking at, involved in synesthesia research for probably 25 years now, just under 25 years. And I just absolutely adore these little references. I came across one, I don't know if you've heard of this one, but we've actually got the very first photograph of a synesthetic individual dates from 1872. And it's a photograph of an 8-year-old girl called Ellen Emerson, who just happens to be, or happened to be, the daughter of the American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson. Now, a close friend of the Emersons wrote to Ralph Waldo and said that, and this was in what, 1845? And he actually said, I was struck by Ellie's asking if I did not use coloured words. And she said that she could tell the colour of a great many words, and she used to amuse children at school by doing so. And that's something that a lot of synesthetes can relate to. It's a bit like having, this party trick. I used to do it as a kid
Yeah.
and tell what they tasted of. Whether they believed me or not was another matter. But I used to find it fun, and so did they, as long as they tasted nice, of course. But
I also have a trick as a synesthete because I can see people's voices. I see it in color and I see it as frequencies. So what I do is I compose their voices. I write a little cute classical musical piece for them, and synesthetes enjoy this especially because they can see it too. So they're like, I really do sound like that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, but my own synesthesia, because I used to be asked a lot, what use is it? What possible use could this be, tasting words? But I used to use it at school to learn lists because we used the rote system of learning at my school, and that's where you sit down, they give you a big long list of dates,
Mm.
loads and loads of names, and it was easy for me to memorize those because I got a sequence of tastes. And taste sequences tend to go straight into my
Wow.
long-term memory, so I could actually recall these dates and places pretty well. The only difficulty I had was retranslating the tastes I experience back into English, if you like.
Mm.
Um, because as with most synesthetes, my synesthesia is one way. I hear something, I get a taste. I don't taste something and immediately associate it with a word sound or a sound. It's just totally and utterly one way. But yeah, I mean, it's useful. It was certainly useful for me as a child, and I created a London Underground map, and I travelled the London Underground tube by simply sequences of tastes. So if somebody says to me, "Do you want to get from Amersham to Tottenham Court Road?" I get the taste of Amersham, and as soon as I get the taste of Amersham, I then can go down the route that I need to take. And the London Underground system is quite a complex system, but it's so easy because it's all in long-term memory. So, it is useful in certain respects.
It's very useful. That you ask something you said something very wise because people would say, why would it be useful for you to see people's voices or to see when you read? Why do you have to have a color vision when you read? Why do you need to taste those? And this is something that is the base of trying to understand synesthesia, mainly focused on what is that and how do we name this condition? Because at the beginning of research, people thought that synesthesia might be an eye condition, an eye problem, or maybe an eye hyper focus or whatever. But the thing is that you said very wisely, all these little notion, all these little types of synesthesia that we have, whether it's tasting, hearing, feeling, even mirror touch synesthesia, it help us process the memory in a much more fast way. If I was sitting in the London Underground, I was able to taste each station. I'd know I wouldn't get, you know, distracted, and I know exactly when to go because I'd hear it, and then I know, okay, Tottenham Court, it stays, it stays. I'd feel the taste. I wouldn't even have to hear what the speaker says. I would immediately know it and I'd get off.
Yeah,
Um, and this is when also researchers and people that study this situation, that's when they realize, okay, this is not something physical that's happening in their eyes. This is not an eye condition. This is not an eye disease. It's something very mental, psychological that goes inside the brain, but somehow helps these people. And this is something that I also would like to relate to because when the fascination with synesthesia began, they said like, oh, we know about this condition, and they dated it back like 200, 250 years. That's obviously not the case. You're holding a book right there that's showing that it's obviously not the case. But if there's something that I'd like to say about synesthetes, I know a lot of synesthetes are very intuitive, and sometimes this intuition that they have might also go to esoteric places, but real synesthetes, they're not esoteric people, they're not psychic nor medium. They just feel, and they feel very objective things. The way that they describe things is very specific. It's not a voice from somewhere that's talking to them, it's their own brain categorizing, opening new folders, closing folders. Today we have computers. And sometimes I also pay attention in my lectures, the way that I explain synesthesia best is referring to our brain as a computer unit. But imagine trying to doing that 200 and 300 years ago. That would have been very difficult.
oh yeah, exactly right. these things tend to come and go in waves as well, interest in stuff like this, because something I'd like to mention, why synesthesia sort of dropped in and dropped out of fashion and then got come back in,
Mm-hmm.
because of movements like behaviorism, where they tended to sort of put to one side internal feelings. It was all to do with quantifiable environments that you're in. That's why you behave the way you do. And so, synesthesia's had its ups and downs. What always fascinates me about it mostly is the way that synesthetes, as you quite rightly point out, are so specific. Nothing's ever just red. It's red with lumpy bits in, or it's the middle bit's red. It's a dark red, and the outside's a different color, a different shade of red, and they can be so specific. And it's like me and my flavors, I think, because I might describe something as tasting like a melted Mars bar, but believe you me, it's far more complex than that. All I'm trying to do there is give somebody a sense of exactly what it's like for me. Um, and most of my flavors and textures come from childhood. People say to me, why does it taste like a wet nappy? And it's not the taste of it so much, it's the fact that wet nappies, because I had a baby sister who was always wetting her nappy, and it was the chlorine kind of chemical taste that you get that hangs around that produces this taste and flavor I had. Um, and a lot of mine, it's like when I go to Bond Street. I've tried to analyze all this. Bond Street to me isn't a food. It tastes of somebody's spraying a load of hairspray into my mouth,
Wow.
and yeah, it's pretty horrible. And I, when I think about it, do you know where that comes from? I used to go to London with my aunts, and this was in the 60s when I was a child, a long time ago. But they used to wear those big beehive things that were in fashion at the time. And of
Yeah.
course, to maintain it, they used to spray loads of hairspray on. And I'm pretty sure that's where it comes from. And a lot of my tastes and flavors, have their roots in my childhood and childhood experiences. It's a bit like having your mother bouncing you on a knee and then feeding a rusk into your face. And she says, "This is a rusk." You make the immediate connection, even as a young child, especially when you're learning language. Because as kids, we tend to learn language up, certainly in my case, between the ages of 2 and 5. I was learning language and speaking, and it all sort of emanates from that. So it's got a fascinating history.
I really do think that the main focus, like, when is synesthesia being designed, crafted in our head? It's mostly related to our childhood experience. Something in our brain as children is just doing control alt delete, no, control alt save about all the things that fascinate us, or give us some sort of like an emotion and empathy for, like when you describe the situation with the hairspray. This is something very, I think that all of us as children had experience watching our mother getting ready, and the whole process that contained a lot of sensory activation to it. We were looking, we were hearing, we were probably also hearing her speak and tell us, "Oh, you don't want to be late." We were also probably very stressed at that moment. But if there's something that is also fascinating, I think in the Zach's thesis, most of his records of synesthesia, he was speaking about how he started seeing the world as a kid
Mm.
until adolescence and then growing up. But the point where synesthesia started becoming interesting in the I want to say medical, but I want to say social world and field. It was when, I think, by the end of and the beginning of the 19th century, that's when Charles Darwin was eager to take out his evolution theory. And if you've read his book, and of course his entire study, he has a fascination with the human eye. That's when his cousin Sir Francis Galton started developing this term, coined the term epigenetic, And that's when he's like, okay, give me all the interesting cases. And this is how he actually coined this term, synesthesia. And at first they focused on the eye receptors, what goes on with the synesthete eye. And at that point they realized, okay, it's not the eye, it's something in the brain, I guess.
Yeah, because I think certainly following that study, synesthesia moved away because it was always to do with colour, always to do with colour. All early references just about colour, and it made people think and made people study the fact that this was way beyond just colour
Yeah.
associations. And again, that's all down to Georg and his study that he carried out in 1812. I mean, being a synesthete himself, it was quite a brave thing to do as well, I think. And yeah, he was openly condemned. The French physician was it Cornez? He looked on all of this stuff as being an abnormality rather than anything else, which was something that synesthetes have had to live with right the way up until probably the 1980s, I would suggest.
Yeah.
Being told that they've got something that's abnormal. It is not abnormal. It's quite popular, as you're aware. 1 in 23 people is rare, but it's not that rare because in every average school classroom, there's at least one synesthete sitting there taking all this stuff in. And especially with children, it must be difficult for them because they've got nobody to speak to about it, which is why we do our work at the Synesthesia Association and we go out to schools and we try and teach and show teachers and people in the medical profession that this is real. And, we try and explain to them the lived in experience of synesthesia because it can be very, very overwhelming. And I've had this. I've been told I'm a fantasist from the age of 5. Why would I be a fantasist at 5? When you're that age, you want to tell people what they want to hear, what you think they want to hear. You want to please people. You don't want to, make enemies of them. And that's what I always felt I was because I was just openly condemned all the time. And most synesthetes, as you're probably well aware, think it's all normal and natural. I did as a child, to be honest.
Yeah.
We only ever come out and think, this isn't normal and natural when it causes us issues, and that tends to be when we enter the adult world.
Yeah.
In my case, it was sitting exams at school because I had real tremendous difficulties concentrating because of the environment that the exams were held in those days. And that's when I went to my mother and told her about it. That can we find out what this is? And she took me to a doctor. In those days, you had a family doctor that you picked up when you were a child, and you stayed with that doctor until the doctor died of old age. I mean, that was the way the system worked there. But our family doctor said, no, he's always had a wild imagination, and it was a bit of a kick in the guts, really, because I was 15 then, and I was sort of railing against it because I realised it was real, and I wanted somebody to tell me it was real. But after that, I just dropped the subject, I suppose.
Wow.
Totally dropped it and just tried to get on living with it. But yeah, I mean, we owe a great deal of gratitude to people like Sachs because they opened this up, and we owe less a degree of gratitude to people like Cornez who decided it was an abnormality rather than anything
Yeah.
else.
I think with synesthesia, if there's something that I noticed from reading all about this, is that synesthesia get recognition in waves, right? It's like, but I feel like it really gets the recognition that it needs when a synesthete describe his inner world, because we know that it's not an eye disease. Cordes said it because he was He had a color blindness, so I think it's called daltonism, the term. So he's like, oh, you see more colors, I see less. So you also have a disease, but it works the other way around. And no, it's not this way. Also back then, I mean, their whole approach was this is something, there's normality, and what's not normal, it's just abnormal. And today it's not like that. But I think to this day on, what really inspires also synesthetes to acknowledging their condition is that the fact that we're very creative people. We're very creative people. We're able to adapt to situations all the time because of the, overwhelming sensory sensation that we have when we go out and we're socializing. But we're really good at adapting into new conditions, and so our brain is very creative, and this is something that is inspiring people. I think that these days we see a lot of interest in synesthesia because this entire generation is getting used to being distracted and trying to remain focused. And this is something synesthete's been doing very well for ages, I guess, but I haven't gotten the proper, you know, analysis done on them.
Sort of jumping ahead really to sort of briefly mentioning my own involvement with synesthesia research. It sort of began in the late 1990s, as I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was having it looked at, and it took a great deal of effort to get somebody to actually take me seriously, I ended up, in fact, going to the Maudsley Hospital, which is a head trauma hospital in London. They deal with people who been hit over the head with an iron bar or fallen off a motorbike and damaged their brain. That's the only place I could get somebody to listen. But really, when I was having it checked out on a proper research program where they'd managed to gather in loads of other synesthetes, it became rapidly, well, very, very quickly obvious that the vast majority were of a creative bent, if you like. There were professionally or privately artists, musicians, performers, graphic designers, that sort of thing. And that was one of the earliest research programs I got involved in. Are synesthetes more creative? The initial results pointed to the fact that they weren't, but the testing has improved over the years, and it's now definitely the case that evidence available now strongly suggests that all synesthetes are far more, well, at least synesthesia is far more common amongst creative types.
Yeah.
And they are more creative. And this is down to standard creativity tests. They make you come up with 38 different uses for a piece of wire. And we synesthetes are very, very good at that, and very, very good at other skills. So yes, we are. But when you think about it, if your head's full of extra connections, you're bound to be a bit more creative, I think, because there's a lot more going on in your head.
Yes.
And I think synesthetes, have an enhanced aesthetic sensitivity, and that tends to steer them into these directions within the arts. So
yeah, into creative directions.
Yeah.
I wondered, so you knew your condition had a name after you were on that research?
Oh yeah, it took a long time. As I said, I got slapped down by my doctors when I was 15, and it took another 15 years before I actually realized that other people experience this.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to the reason I'm here, because I was going to talk about research, and if I just quickly go through the history of the way I've seen it from the text that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
It mentioned, in 1812 about Sachs. Fantastic work, brilliant, opened up the field. It sort of died down a bit, really, and it came to the fore again around about 1876. And this was a time of intense debate about the nature of synesthesia, its causes, and how it should be named.
Yeah.
And this 20-year span between 76 and 1895 saw a massive upsurge in reported cases of synesthesia. Now, this was probably due in most part to the German physicist and philosopher. I have trouble with these now. I think it was Gustav Fechner, he was called.
Yeah, Fachner.
Yeah, and in 1876, he reported the first, I think it was the first empirical study of coloured letters, and he used 73 synesthetes. He managed to gather
Wow,
73 synesthetes together.
that's
And of
amazing.
course, you mentioned Sir Francis Galton, brilliant. Cousin of Charles Darwin. He had to be good, didn't he? Coming from a family like that.
Exactly.
He followed this up in the 1880s, and I think he produced a piece on visualized numbers, which appeared in, which was a very esteemed journal of the time called Nature. And also, you know, there's been other people that have played quite a large part. There was a couple of Swiss medical students. I think I think one of them was called Bleuler, and the other one was Carl Bernhard Lehmann. Anyway, these
Yeah,
were
Bernhard
Swiss
Lehmann.
laymen, yeah, two medical students. That's what they were, medical students. They discovered 6 different types of synesthesia, and this was in 1881.
Yeah. That's when, for us in the States, something started being very interesting during those years.
No, it was a time of enlightenment, but they discovered 6 different types, and these different types were there was light color,
Yeah. Sound color too.
form from hearing sounds. So you know, people heard sounds and saw light colors and shapes. There was sight producing sounds. So, you know, they saw things from sounds. There was color from taste, there was colors from smell, and colors and shapes for pain, heat, and touch, which was quite an innovative one. And I think the 6th one they found was shapes having colors, you know, they're very specific colors. But all of this stuff, again, this was what, 1881, all of this died down after this, and simply because I think probably it was to do again with the behaviorist movement. I mentioned it before. This started in the 1920s, I think, and it really took off in the 20s and lasted for 30 years before it was starting to be rubbished.
Yeah.
And there was an increased interest in behaviorism, in psychology, and its focus was on, as I mentioned before, observable behavior, data sets, and events. And totally ignoring internal subjective experiences, which is a real shame. You know, I mean, internal subjective experiences are part of living. And really, after that, you know, we're talking about 1950s now. There was another gap. It sort of died down again, and it came to the fore in the 1970s. And I think probably the reason for that is we started to talk about internal states and consciousness because there was some sort of cognitive revolution at the time. People were thinking differently. And again, it's down to if you're not worrying about fighting wars and all the rest of it, starvation, you've got time to think about internal issues. And it came to the fore again. And really, this was down to, I've got to mention these people because they're so important, and not many people have heard of them, not many synesthetes have, but God, are they important people. This sort of regeneration led to an interest in synesthesia resurfacing as a topic of psychological inquiry. And it was people like, and I mentioned him, Larry Marks, absolutely fantastic man. He's quite old now, but he's still going strong.
Wow.
He's at Yale University, absolutely brilliant. And Dr. Richard Saitoic, who you would have heard of.
Of
I
course.
don't know if you're aware of Richard, but I mean, I've known Richard for many, many years. Fantastic bloke, very erudite, brilliant bloke. But he was warned off about studying synesthesia. I mean, one of his friends had it, and it fascinated him because everything in life fascinates Richard. But it fascinated him. He knew it was real, but he was warned off by his academic peers because they said it would damage his academic career, which
I
was
know, I
terrible,
know, I know, I know. It's terrible.
absolutely terrible. But he ignored all that. He shrugged it all off, and that's why, you know, we owe him a debt we could never repay. And this was in the 1980s. He reignited the whole thing and generated a whole new set of people interested in understanding synesthesia. And he, in fact, published a couple of books. Union of the Senses, I think, was his first one in 2002. The Man Who Tasted Shapes was another one. I think that came out a year later. But also, this all this new research sort of corresponded, I think, with the founding of psychology as a legitimate scientific field, because it was never ever taken that seriously, to be honest. But around about this time, it was actually, recognised as a proper scientific field of study. And sort of to counteract the USA involvement over in the UK, we're pioneers here as well. We had Simon Baron-Cohen, now Sir Simon Baron-Cohen, who's he's an expert in autism now. And we had Geoffrey Gray and John Harrison, all of which I've had the privilege of meeting. Absolutely brilliant. They formed the UK Synaesthesia Association in 1989, which is still going today. That's 35 years later. And they did it in order to gather together and study people who experience synesthesia. And again, going into the modern age, even then, there was lots of skepticism. I know, because I've faced so much of it. Modern research was given an absolutely massive uplift by the emergence of affordable functional magnetic resonance imaging equipment, fMRIs, basically.
Of course.
A lot of people don't like them. Even Richard Saitoic says, what do you need them for? We don't need that to prove synesthesia is real. But the point is, it enabled sort of empirical evidence to be gathered of how synesthetes' brain operate in a different way to non-synesthetes. And the important thing here, apart from proving that synesthesia was real, which we knew anyway, it could also, be argued, why do you need to spend all that money? But what it really did was it enabled valuable funding to be granted, because, people within the science and research establishments said, well, we've got something down on paper here now. It is real. And that released funding, which then increased the range of study of synesthesia. And today, they're looking at developmental neurological and psychological roots of synesthesia. And something I think is very important is research into synesthesia in kids and children. We really need to concentrate on picking this up sooner as far as kids are concerned. There's always been an issue with them because you can't stick a child into an fMRI scan without them screaming the house down or making them stay still, because kids don't stay still. I don't stay still.
Have they tried asking synesthetes to adult, obviously, to do the fMRI? And
Yeah, they asked adults to go through fMRI scans.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the issue with fMRI, one of the big questions I'm always asked constantly in the UKSA is, where do I get diagnosed? Well, you can't really.
No, you can't.
Diagnose. I mean, you can if you go through an fMRI scan, because it's down on paper, but those things cost tens of thousands of pounds to run. You can't go to your local doctor and say, can you get me an fMRI?
I'm assuming there's a whole line of people that actually need that, unfortunately, with, brain tumors that waiting for this. And our demand as synesthetes to be properly diagnosed would be, you're at the bottom of the list now, and you'll pay for it too.
I can understand that. You can't expect the NHS or any other medical profession to shoulder the cost of all this for something that's still seemed to be pretty subjective and not pointless, but what's the reason?
I mean, it's important, of course.
But yeah, it's always been an issue that, but you can't. But I'll tell you the latest development. Again, Jamie Ward, who's one of the world's leading experts in synesthesia down at the University of Sussex, he's developed a test that you can give to anybody, and it's just a series of questionnaires, and you can give this to children as well. Not one question references synesthesia, or you can't see any links between trying to work out whether the person has synesthesia, but he can produce some sort of spidery graph. I don't know what he calls it. And he says, and if he says it, it's got to be true. He says that he can detect whether the likelihood of somebody having synesthesia to a percentage success rate of something like 87%. And the fact he can give that to children has got to be valuable. I've worked a lot with kids, and it's a shame. Number one, they get slapped down, and number two, it suppresses their creative abilities.
Yes, absolutely. A part of my, I think that you mentioned Richard, and I think a lot of synesthetes nowadays owe their, you know, realizing that owe their exploration, a lot of synesthetes conduct a self-exploration in order to find out what this condition, if this condition has a name, and then if it is, then what is it? And they ended up finding out about Richard and his amazing book, which I always mentioned here, Wednesday's Indigo Blue. So he's like, the founding fathers. I would place him there. A lot of synesthete would be exposed to his battery test also online. If they joined the statistic there and they do the test, they can figure out. But I think today that we are able to sync this way, get together this way online from all around the world. It's really in our power to see how this genetic trait is being passed down. I have a son, and I can tell you when I was pregnant, I always thought to myself, will he be a synesthete? And I will try to find out through his semantics, through his language, if he is one. Because when I was his age, when I was 6, when I was 7, the first thing that I was scared of is expressing myself fully, because the looks that I would get from when I describe how I see words in different colors, those were not nice. And as a child, the only thing you want to do is be validated. You want attention, you want to be validated. And we always tell children, oh, you're imagining this. It's just, monsters don't exist and this don't exist. And along the way of treating children this way, a lot of synesthete children would be, their creativity would be suppressed. And as parents, this is something I decided to do. I would tell any synesthete to pay attention to their children and develop their skills. Let's see what they can do. Let's see how fast they can comprehend concepts in music theory at a young age, or in art, or in mathematics. And let's see how quickly they evolve or being developed into the net. And I can tell you that with experience with my own son, it's phenomenal. I've started working with him when he was 2 or 3 years old, about giving a voice to music, help him narrate his inner world when it comes to seeing music. By the time he was 5 or 4, he was also he started talking about numbers as if they have gender, and of course they're in colors. When he'd see numbers show on the toddler's TV, and they would say 3 is yellow, and my son would be, no, it's green. And then I knew, okay, I didn't interfere back then. I was like, okay, he's a synesthete, he's showing signs. But one thing that was remarkable for me is that I play many musical instruments. And when he was 5, I decided that I want him to learn how to play the piano. It's a very young age, but I found the right teacher to do that. And I was present at the lessons that he got. And as a child, when a very young child at the age of 5, when you start learning how to play the piano, the first thing they would tell you is that they ask you if you could tell the difference between the white keyboards and the black keyboards. So that's the first thing kids needs to pay attention to. And I remember him, I sat there silently, and he said the next thing, I don't see white or black. There's a rainbow of colors. And then he touched C, and he's like, this is red. This is blue. And I'm like, okay, my child is a synesthete. And that's when I decided, to gear up. That's when I started, I told him, you're a synesthete and we need to focus on that. And I've conducted tiny exercises for him to see how he remembers letters, how he remembers number, what when he hears music, how does it make him feel or what he sees. By the time he was 6.5, he was already diagnosed professionally in the local conservatory that he has absolute hearing. And I don't
Right.
think it's absolute hearing. I think it's a synesthete acknowledging the fact that he has synesthesia because it's easier for him to comprehend it. And of course, he was also um, they did an exam to him and they told him, yeah, you will learn how to play the violin, forget the piano. Let's start with the most difficult instrument and see how it goes for you since there. And he's showing tremendous talent on the violin. And you know what? It's not just the violin, it's any instrument that he touches it. He knows exactly how to pick up the right notes. And if you ask him how he does that, he'll say, I see the colors. The colors help me.
Well, I may have mentioned this to you before, but you actually met her on one of the Zoom meetings we had.
Alexandra, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I was introduced to her work as a voice coach probably 2016, so you're looking at eight years ago, and it was fascinating because, as I mentioned, they actually film these children speaking to themselves, no,
Mm.
speaking amongst themselves, describing how they use their synesthesia to get to the right note, to realize that something was right and something was wrong. And to hear children, aged, I think they're aged between 7 and 10, they're all musical prodigies, but to listen to them describing their feelings and saying, no, 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 it needs to go up there. It's more red up there. It was absolutely fascinating
Yeah,
without any adult intervention. And that's what we need to encourage because kids are just being suppressed and they're not being taught how to use this. And it's an absolute gift, which is the exact opposite of being called an abnormality, which is the
exactly.
child I went through. It's an abnormality.
And
I,
I would say that together with the fact that each parent as a synesthete or what Alexandra is doing in teaching little kids in a synesthete method how to look at music and detect the right note. But as a parent to a synesthete, it's not always easy for the child to be a synesthete because his reaction to hearing and seeing color is not just with music, it's with everything. So he'd go to the kindergarten and he'd see it in a class, and the teacher would tell you, why are you distracted? Don't be distracted. And he cannot help but not being distracted. That's the I am being distracted constantly, even when I'm engaging. Of course, you are being distracted by your inner word with tastes and tasting each and every one of my words and the changes around you. How can we shut this distraction off? So a lot of people from the pedagogic, system would think, oh, he's distracted. Maybe it's ADHD. No, it's not. But they always tell you he's distracted, but then again, he's also very focused and he knows how to answer properly. But still, the distraction when we talk to him, he looks the other way, and I'm like, I tell them it's synesthesia, and they usually tell me, what is that? That's when that's when I tell them Google Richard E. Sidgwick on and read about him on Wikipedia. Read a little bit about this.
yeah, and it's good because the way we've certainly in the UK anyway, the way we've given the message is to explain it through the lived-in experience, and that's very important because as you're aware, neurology is a very dry subject. It's all to do with Brodmann's areas, V this, V that, very, very boring
Mm.
synapses between them. Explain to them what it's like as a lived-in experience. They can actually relate to that because we've all got a bit of synesthesia in us. We've
Yeah,
certainly got modality links in us, and that's really synesthesia's very close cousin, as far as I'm concerned. You're not taught to associate light colours with high tones and dark colours with low tones. You're not taught that. At least I was never taught that. This is something that's inbuilt, I would imagine. And at the end of the day, we're all synesthetes when we're born. All those extra connections are all there, and they get pruned away. So, you know, but for a genetic misnomer, that some of these connections remain. So we're all synesthetes. We've all got a bit of it in us. It just needs explaining in a way that people can relate to. And that's really what I do. I concentrate on synesthesia, but I explain it using cross modality as well when I see somebody faltering, you know, with understanding it, because anybody can understand cross modality.
Yeah.
You know, it's matching taste to sound and stuff like that. It's very easy to do. It's a bit like the modern analogy of listening to Leonard Cohen and drinking fizzy champagne. It just doesn't go. You know, you want to drink something dark and moody, or listening to ABBA and drinking black coffee. It just doesn't go. So you can make those connections and gradually bring in synesthesia, and you're there. People understand. Friends at school say to me, like, 'cause I still speak to them, people I went to school with long time ago still don't believe me. They still think that I'm doing it for attention. And the reason they give for that is, why didn't you mention it when you were at school? And the reason I didn't mention it was because I was always getting slapped down, and I can't seem to get that point across to them, which is very annoying. But it's sort of like a lose-lose situation. You mention it, you get down, and you don't mention it, and then people don't believe you because you don't mention it.
But have you ever thought about it, that when people tell us if they think that we're doing this for attention, this is the last thing we would want, like anyone I think would want to do for attention. The thing is that when they tell us if when they tell you if you're doing this for attention, I think in other words they might be saying you are fascinating. Like, there's no way I can just move on with my day now, knowing that there's a human being out there that could literally taste my voice and feel it as if he's eating something. I mean, eating is something very primal for us human. It's something that we live on by, that we need to survive. And you are able to have this experience not only by food, but by actual interactions. So it's not about, you being doing this for attention. That's something that requires attention. That is fascinating. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's always been a struggle. It's like when I tell people about synesthesia, not just my own, they expect you to. Once you've told them, they expect you to go like that, and then things move on the table on their own. They're expecting something else, and it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But that's always been a struggle. And eating, as you're quite right, it's a bit like mirror touch synesthesia. Right? I wouldn't like that in its extreme, because I've spoken to a lot of people with it, and God, does it affect their life? And it affects their life pretty negatively as well most of the time.
I know. I just thought about it, that you mentioned earlier that when you need to take exam and you would go into, I mean, taking exams as a teenage, it's difficult. Adding the synesthesia and being in a crowded room and being stressed because you want to do good, you don't want to forget everything that's running in your head now. As a synesthete, for me, wow, it was difficult. I was distracted by every tiny cough, every tiny movement, every car that driven past the road, and I would see colors and they would confuse me, especially when it came to doing tests that were about algebra and mathematics, because colors confuse me. I saw numbers confuse me. I see their colors popping, and then if I see another color appearing out of nowhere, and then I'd be like, wait, what number is that? Oh, it's not a number, it's just this guy coughing right here. And for you with the taste feeling, but imagine how a mirror touch synesthete feels when they walk into a room with 50 stressed out teenagers. You'd want to throw up. This is what they usually say. They throw up. They feel like this social anxiety in here. And it's insane. I mean, being a mirror touch synesthete, I think it's the most wow. It's something that I don't know how I would be able to live with this. My mirror touch synesthesia is not. I don't experience it the same way that they do. I don't.
It's awful. I'm meeting up with a mirror touch synesthete on well tomorrow actually, and I'm going to help her get through because she wants to go. We're showing Pharrell Williams's film a preview tomorrow, and she wants to go to it, but I know how she reacts, and all it is with her is just coming to terms with it and actually acting on how she feels. I've been out with her a few times now in social situations, and when she starts to crumble, which is quite often, because you're quite right, she picks up the anxiety of everybody in the room if there's anxiety there. Trying to train her to just move and do what I do. Whenever I go anywhere, I always look for a safe space. That's my first thing. I think, where's there a safe space if I need to get away?
Mm,
What we're doing here as well, because there's a lot of synesthetes who like the arts, but you get institutions like the Royal Opera House where if you sit through a performance, a ballet performance there, and you've got the cheek to get up because you want to go to the loo or you just need a break, all the performers throw hissy fits. How dare you get up?
yeah.
Uh, what we're doing is we're actually creating events where you've got access and where people know that people are going to need to escape to a safe space. And that's the way to deal with mirror touch. It's a fascinating one, and it's not one that's easy to get an explanation from because it's so personal. It's a bit like eating in that sticking things in your mouth is extremely personal. Mirror touch is a degree above that.
Yeah.
And we used to have difficulty getting people to speak about it. We've got a database here, probably the largest one in the world of mirror touch synesthetes, but you could never make it public because they wouldn't want that to happen. But it's fascinating reading, believe you me, absolutely fascinating reading.
I
And
really
how
do hope that the podcast would help. I've interviewed two mirror touch synesthetes. And I really do see that the podcast is encouraging mirror touch synesthetes to open up and want to share their stories. And it's fascinating. I must say I've never experienced something like this as a synesthete. It's really important for me. I respect other people surrounding and personal space because I know what it feels like to be invaded by your people's voice. It flies towards me. Sometimes I don't like it. Sometimes I taste their voice and it's not something that I like. And I know what's it like to respect other people's personal space. I know what it's like to be a delicate person and a nice person because I always think like, okay, they see the world like me. So I have to, I have to be gentle, or I have to, either smell good because if I smell something that is bad, whoa, I'm not functioning. This is why I always overspray myself and this. But mirror touch synesthetes, when I prepared myself to interview mirror touch synesthetes, I was like, I need to feel good because if I feel bad today or
oh
if I
yeah,
have minor pain, they will feel it.
yeah,
And they
definitely.
feel it. They feel it. This is something amazing that happened to me with Mary. She's from Scotland. She felt that my right sinusitis was clogged, and she's like, "You're having pain here,"
Mm.
and I'm like, how did you even feel this? She's like, "I see it. I feel it. I see it." I was like, "This is amazing." I mean, that for us in the States, when someone tells you that they can feel you, we know what's it like. I feel it in color. You taste it, but we know what it feels like, and it's not something that we can control. It's not something that we can control.
I mean, that's the big takeaway from everything I've been involved in. Right? It's certainly made me far more tolerant of other people, far more tolerant than I ever was. I understand totally how everybody's subtly different and how the tiniest thing can have the biggest effect. And it's made a really big difference as to how I deal with people in the outside world. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great,
It's
really.
beautiful.
Mirror touch, it's a fascinating trait. But God, how they live with that. Oh,
Yeah, if there's any mirror touch synesthetes listening to this, consider participating on synesthete gathering. Don't be afraid to talk. We feel you. We maybe we don't feel the same way that you feel, but we experience this the same way. And this is so unique. But you know, this is something fascinating because you do the battery test online, you read about synesthesia in books. Mirror touch synesthesia is not a field that was spoken back then by these people. So, but it is a synesthesia, and it's
Yeah, we need to encourage, and you're doing a great job there. If you're encouraging people to speak about it, then
yeah,
that's all for the good. Yeah, one of the really good things about the conferences and stuff we hold is it brings people together, and they're not afraid. They don't mask anymore, and because
yeah.
masking is so tiring, you know. I mean, I always tell people not to mask, but I still mask, and I find it's awful because I don't want to go through the aggravation of having to explain why I don't want to be in this situation. Um, because synesthesia, as you're aware, when it's bad, it is bad.
It is
Uh,
bad.
People, if I don't like the taste of somebody, the taste of somebody's name, or the taste of their voice, I hate to say it, but I don't actually like being in their company, and that's something that's difficult to explain to somebody you've just met or somebody you've got to work with.
I always have it difficult, you know, and yes, as a synesthete, much like you, much like other mirror touch synesthete, we get asked a lot of questions, and by non-synesthete explaining, I could get people asking me now, what's the color of my voice? And then I have to really find the right shade and send it to them. And then they ask me, okay, which shape is it coming out of my mouth? Is it this one? Is it that one? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to focus on this. So it's tiring as it is seeing flying to my face, as and is it's very exhausting now giving a personal analysis to every person that I meet. This is something that I don't face when I meet other synesthetes. It's like this. We have a conversation and it flows. I don't need to over explain myself. They immediately understand me. I don't need to mask my synesthesia. It's something that I believe this is something that I've also witnessed in the synesthesia cafe meeting. It's our facial expression when a person is speaking on a subject and a lot of us agree or disagree with it. You just see that we're all synesthetes by our, micro expression right there, the way we react when someone is giving us, I don't know, that like to face something that us as synesthete would be like, no, no, never. I would never talk to someone that their voice is like, or that they taste like this. This is only something that we would be able to understand each other. And this is why I think it's so easy and it's so liberating talking to other synesthetes, but it is exhausting when it comes to the non-synesthetes. It's like I don't want to explain this.
I think that's the beauty of things like tomorrow night, because there's going to be what 60, 65 synesthetes, and they're all synesthetes, and they're all going to be in a room together, and they don't need to sit there explaining anything. It's such a big relief, and they'll go out in the outside world and really miss being amongst all those synesthetes. It's the biggest takeaway of all. We get that at the conferences. All these conferences we have always end up with people in tears because they know they've got to go back to the real world, and
Ah,
they've enjoyed so much what they've been through over the last 3 or 4 days or whatever. Um,
yeah.
Not having to sit there explaining stuff, and if they want to explain stuff, they don't have to go into any depth because the other person understands exactly what they're going on about. It's brilliant, a fantastic release.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about Meritage Synesthete. You said something very wise right now. Going back to the real world, as a chromesthesia, grapheme synesthesia for me, synesthete, which is my main. I mean, everything I see in colors. Um, Talking to a Meritage Synesthete is very healing. It's I feel like it's very therapeutic also for me. It's sort of like they feel me in a way that even I can't feel with my synesthesia. And I think these people are really, they have healing abilities, something about their aura. They're very nice people. They're very, something about their flow. If I'm going into,
Yeah.
Taoism philosophy approach, their flow is very, very balanced. And I really enjoy talking to them. It's saddening me to know that they're so sensitive and that they wouldn't want to talk about this. But I really encourage Miritat Synesthete, like talk about it, find your own group, your own people. These interaction. I've got to meet amazing Miritat Synesthetes thanks to this podcast idea. And these are people that became my personal friends. I talk to them every day, and it's I don't have words to explain how I feel. But about this convention, when is the next convention? To which convention you are usually going? How many synesthetes usually attend that? And are those synesthetes from the UK or from America as well?
Yeah, we had one in May of this year at Oxford University at Somerville College, and there was what 150 people turned up. Probably
Wow.
30 of those were no, 20 of those were researchers. The rest were all synesthetes.
Mm.
Going on about the next conference, we're going to be holding one. The next one is, I mean, it's 12 months from now because they take quite a lot of setting up. But this one's going to be in Spain, in Granada, in Spain. There's going to be an emphasis on art rather than science because not everybody, especially synesthetes, they don't want to hear about the science all the time. They just want a place where they can be themselves and express themselves. So that one's going to be in October of next year in Granada. The one after that, there's going to be one in Portland in the USA.
The years in Poland. Ah, yeah.
Uh,
I will do my best and I will attend the one in Granada. I really want
oh,
to participate in that and associate with more, meeting more synesthetes.
you'll love that because the thing about Granada is I love going to them and I go whenever I can. The ones there because they're very social. People pick up guitars and start playing them over dinner or whatever, yeah, and it's brilliant. And it turns into one big jam session. Whether you're a
Beautiful.
musician or not, it's fantastic. The emphasis is on having a good time, eating and drinking, because the Spanish like doing that. It goes on late into the night. It's really, really good, which is, slightly different from your normal academic conference, but they're brilliant. So if you can get to that, yeah, please do, because they're fantastic.
Ooh, James, I have an interesting question for you. I wonder if when people talk, their voice tastes like something specific. I wonder what's it like when they sing. Does the texture of the voice changes?
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, to be honest, I'm very picky with what I like to hear with singing voices. It's because they're very textural, and it's not the flavour so much; it's the texture. Because if it's giving me a big mouth feel, I sometimes feel uncomfortable with that.
mm.
But yeah, it does change. I mean, I'm pretty sure because I've heard you sing, and it changes. You're see the taste of your voice is something I've always had difficulty doing because I know you've asked me before and I've never answered. And the reason is it's so complicated. I don't know what it is about you, but when it sings, it actually simplifies it. When I
Oh,
hear you singing, yeah, I haven't heard a lot of you singing, but I've heard a couple of little snippets.
wow, I could send definitely more.
Yeah,
I hear voices and I'm very picky. I'm very picky. I think most of the synesthetes that I've interviewed were picky. None of them were like, "Oh, I enjoy hearing everything." No, no one
yeah,
said that. But I too, when I hear voices, some voices are so rich, I can smell them, and I really enjoy specific artists. I really enjoy hearing, and sometimes I would skip a meal or I would not drink coffee because this artist just provided me the coffee that I needed. And this is something that probably only you could understand.
yeah. I can relate to that totally. Yeah, it's a weird thing, but it's nice. It's very very nice. But yeah, to answer your question about singing, it does change it quite a lot. It tends to simplify it. I don't know why. I think it's probably there's not so much intonation in singing, the pauses between words. Because with synesthesia, it's the contrasting sound. That's what emphasizes the synesthetic, certainly with me anyway. If you mumble or you speak quickly, it doesn't affect me as much as if you speak slowly simply because the contrasts aren't there. And I think that probably applies to most synesthetes, whether they're looking at colours or whatever. But it's just nice to be able to speak to people about it, and people do know that some of them don't taste very nice, but they don't take offence.
Hmm.
Whereas a non-synesthete probably would.
Mm. Have you tried when you speak, how do you perceive your own voice? Is it also this rich in texture and multiple tastes?
No, it's very, very simple. It, it's like chewing gum that's lost its flavour. It's very rubbery, and it's not nice, to be honest. I don't find it offensive, but I don't particularly like it. I wish I had a different voice, but I haven't. So, but yeah,
Aren't you trying? You could probably work on it. I don't know. I mean,
I've got a voice changer on my phone, which I sometimes use.
sometimes that is amazing. You got a voice changer and you change the voice based on the taste. That is
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, it's really good. It's interesting. I mean, I only do it out of interest, but it makes such a difference. But I don't like the taste of my voice. I don't like the taste of my name either, which is very similar again to chewing gum that's lost its flavour. And it's because it's textural
For
rather
me,
than.
for me, if I wanna sound like the artist that I'm hearing, then I am able to do that because I see the music in color, so I can match my voice shade to the shade of that artist, but I don't always get the same texture in my mouth. So I'm like, it's something you need to be born with. It's like they have a whole different diaphragm than me. So, but yeah,
Yeah, texture plays a very important part in any synesthetic experience. I've found through the years, with all the synesthetes I've spoken to, texture is very important. As is the emotional side, because it was pointed out to me many years ago that the ones that you really pick up on are the disgust. You don't tend to concentrate or linger over really pleasant ones. I don't anyway. If I taste something or hear something, it's really pleasant tasting, it comes and goes. But if I hear something and it produces a feeling of disgust, then it stays with me. And that's
wow.
what I like. But apparently that's normal.
It is normal. I think it is because also some people you ask them how their memory works when it comes to processing feelings. It's those negative thoughts and the negative feelings that tend to linger on rather than focusing on the good times and the times that we were happy. People
Mm.
seem to focus on negative emotions mainly. I personally don't. Like my whole world and my whole existing is focusing on feeling happy and feeling nice. This is why I always carry tiny perfume bottles with me. Because if I meet someone that I don't like the color of their voice or what it smells like, I'm just taking I'm spraying on myself and then I'm in my little bubble of happiness.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and people see me and they're like, "Are you?" I have a collection of like maybe 66 different perfumes, and people are like, what is going on in your head? Why do you need so many?" I'm like, "Trust me, I need a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Society, people are exhausting. I need a lot. I need to do whatever I can to deal with that."
Have you ever spoken with a perfumer that's a synesthete? Because I do know a couple of those. If ever you want to
I've
have a
met one. I've wanted a perfumer to make me a special perfume, and then by the way he described how he see the scent pyramid, I was like, okay, he has synesthesia. He's like, you see, this note is vanilla, and it's like a trapeze. And I was like, no, no one says that vanilla looks like a trapeze. That's something that and he's like, it's orange and it's a flying trapeze, and these are flying circles. And I'm
yeah.
like, you have synesthesia, and he didn't even know what's that. He's like, what? I thought everyone see the world this way. I'm like, no.
Ooh. Yeah, it's an amazing thing, and that's why the podcasts like this are really good because it's getting the word out there even more. We try and concentrate here on countries that don't really cover it,
Yeah.
maybe for religious reasons or cultural reasons, and it's quite difficult to break in. But the ones we
Why
do,
religious reasons, if I may ask?
well, you'd have to ask them that. But I think probably they find something like this a bit of a threat. It's a bit like breaking
Why is
into
that?
Africa, into the continent of Africa with their their juju culture. You, you're never ever going to be able to break through that because it's been there for such a long time. I'm talking about witchcraft and stuff like that because if I mean, back in the day, one of the reasons why synesthesia wasn't studied was because there was this correlation with things like that. I mean, that's why witches got burned in England in the
Do you
16th.
think that this is why? I mean, I don't, I can't imagine a synesthete witch or something like that. Synesthetes are two aesthetics. If we they like everything to be nice and clean and tidy, and they don't like to deal with things where they have to, exhaust themselves because the world is exhausting as it is. I think that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like though people having autistic fits. People on the spectrum having a fit. I mean, that used to be viewed as some kind of weird. It's just so backward. But I can sort of see vaguely where they're coming from. But that was in the days where people weren't educated properly.
Yeah.
But breaking into Arab countries and African countries is quite an ordeal. But it's
Wow.
worth it because synesthesia is worldwide. It's not contained in the West by any means, obviously.
Yeah. If I could say something, and I don't, I'm pretty sure that not a lot of synesthetes have heard about this or would hear about this, but this is something that I have when I grew up, I thought that elements from the Old Testament, which is the Torah, the Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, some elements from the Old Testaments are really in a synesthete way
Mhm.
that they describe things. So, for instance, like if something bad is about to happen, they say that a sound would arise, a sound would arise from the atmosphere, from the air, from thin air, and only people who had like prophetic abilities and the leaders could have picked up on this sound and they knew, oh yeah, the people must repent. But it's not. This is something that as a little girl with synesthesia, I'd think, oh yeah, that's the frequencies I see every day. And when I was a little girl, I thought that these frequencies that I see was the sound that's God announcing to his people. And then I realized that I can hear nature. I can see nature. So it's not that. But there's a specific quote from the it's called the state of Mount Sinai. So the state of Mount Sinai is when all the Israelites are standing and waiting for God to speak, and that was the time where he didn't speak through Moses. He spoke directly to the people, but he gave them a special ability, and this is crazy. You could see my voice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it in Hebrew now. והיו כל העם רואים את הקולות. So the people could have seen the voice of God speaking, and they describe it in the most synesthete way.
Mm.
His words that came out of his mouth, they had colors and they were seen in front of these people. I didn't even know if these people knew how to write and read back then. They were all slaves that came out of Egypt, But for some reason, God was communicating through synesthesia, and it was obvious. If you would define his synesthesia today, it would be a ticker-tapper synesthesia. As a child, I thought to myself, "Oh wow,
Yeah,
that that
I'm
that
gonna look
blew
that
my
up.
mind."
Yeah, I've never heard of that before, so I'm going to have a look at
I'm gonna
that.
send it to you because it's like he turned everyone into a synesthete so they would be able to communicate with him, and his form of communication was grapheme synesthesia, ticker-tapper synesthesia. That is,
Excellent.
yeah, I know. So this is why sometimes when I lecture, especially here in Israel, I give them this sentence from our Bible. I'm like, that's the first notation of synesthesia in our Bible. They're like, whoa, we've always thought about what it meant to see the words, to see the voice. And then that's when I go on and talk about the fact that I have chromesthesia and I can see your voices the same way that God was able to see the voice back then. And It's in those little things. It's in those little, you know, comments and sentences that as a synesthete you realize, wow, this is synesthesia.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to
Yeah,
you.
please.
Yeah. So dear James, thank you so much for being a guest on this episode of Chromatic Minds. This was a very enlightening conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. No, I apologise for the loss of light, but
It's okay.
I can't help that. No, it's been good. It's nice to be able to speak to non-academics about stuff like this, and for people to get it and understand it. I just want people to know that there's a lot of work gone into making synesthesia known, and this is beyond the science, because I know yourself, you're not particularly over keen on the science of synesthesia, because again, you think the same way I do. You've got synesthesia, there's no question about it. Why
No questioning
you
about it.
need science to back it up? But science has played an important part, and research has played an important part, just like Sachs did. If Sachs hadn't have spoken up, we'd have been another 100 years behind the times, I reckon.
Absolutely. If I
So
could say, I think Zach's and you are an amazing example of how synesthesia is becoming fascinating to other people when synesthetes describe how they see the world, taste the world. If science one day would be able to make it stop, would you make it stop? This is something that I want to know.
no, not
No,
in a
right?
million years.
Yeah.
I was actually asked many years ago, because they can stop um, seeing colours for sounds, because they can pound your brain with magnetic pulses. Those things that look like Victorian torture instruments. They stick all these things on your head and it compound it. Because it disrupts the flow between the two areas, between the sound
Wow.
and the
This
sight,
is incredible. Wow.
it disrupts it, so you lose it. And I was offered that, and there's no way, because it would scare me to death. I wouldn't know what life would be like without it. It's a pain sometimes, but life without it, I wouldn't be able to remember anything. I wouldn't be able
Exactly.
to remember your name. I wouldn't be able to remember anything. Everything would be a fog.
I wouldn't be able to play any instrument. I mean, I have 9 different guitars in my house that each one of them requires different tuning. And the way that non-synesthete people look at me and they're like, how do you do this? Why do you need that? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's easy. It's only thanks to synesthesia.
Yeah, I like your Union Jack one. You've got one there with the Union Jack on, haven't you, somewhere? I've seen.
Yeah. My tiny ukulele. This one,
Yeah, you
when I
can.
travel, I take it with me.
Well, if you come to Spain, bring that to Spain with you.
Or if I come to Spain, I'll bring my guitar-lele. That's a guitar with that is tiny like a ukulele. It's a ukulele guitar with 6 strings.
Mm,
Yeah, and
nice.
it's used for flamenco. So yeah.
Well, I'm doing an event on the 20th of November in London, which is fusing African music,
Oh,
African drum music, and all the rest of it with synesthesia. That should be good, because you don't get a chance to do that very often. We've got an African performer, very very good performer. But yeah, we're doing one of those in at the end of the month, like 3 weeks away, I think. Yeah. But again, explaining synesthesia through music is one of the best ways of doing it.
yeah,
Everybody loves
without a doubt.
it. Yeah.
Maybe hopefully we'll be able to explain synesthesia better through also feelings and emotion. Mirror touch synesthesia is fascinating.
Yeah. It's one area that I thought they should have concentrated on earlier, because I used to tell them that, if I don't like something, I really don't. There's an emotional pull attached to that I can't control, and they never took me seriously for some reason.
Mhm.
But to me, it's quite important that. And a lot of synesthetes will say the same. If they don't like the colour of somebody's name, they don't like that person. And it's not something you can easily explain. How can I explain? I don't like the taste of your voice. It makes me feel sick. I mean, that's not nice, is it?
It's not nice. It's not nice. It's
So you're
not.
lucky yours doesn't. Yours is too complicated to make me feel sick. It's really weird. I'm going to try and write it down what it is. I'll let you know when I do because it's quite complicated. There's tomato ketchup in there as well, which is weird.
What?
Yeah, tomato ketchup, overlying tomato ketchup with loads of other different bits in there. Very
My
weird.
God, I want you to write it down and I will turn it into a recipe and I would bake it into a cookie. And I'll give it to you once I see you. Like, I brought you cookies, James, and you'll be like, no, I'm not having those.
I remember once I had to, I did a synesthesia garden at a big flower show, and this party of school kids came up, and there was 50 of them, and I had to sit there and tell each of them what their names tasted like and what their voice tasted like.
Oh,
But they all had to be nice because they're children. You can't, you can't tell a child he's got a horrible tasting voice.
actually, you could tell a child that because they would not be offended. I think children are just, tiny monsters. They can say what if they can say whatever they want to each other, I'm telling them what I think about them.
Yeah, I suppose there's some truth in that. Yeah, kids can be really cruel.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I see. The way I had to deal with kids. I think one of my early embarrassing memory about synesthesia is that I really used to love write. Of course, if I love words and seeing words, then I would like to write. I write poems with my favorite words that I enjoyed their color. And this is something I did when I was little, and everyone in the class laughed at me. And that's when I was like, I'm never writing again. A tremendous loss to the literature world, I'd say.
I'll tell you something related to that. I was a journalist for 2 years. I got bored doing. I used to be in IT, and I got bored with that. So I thought I'd become a journalist because I like playing with words and I like the
Yeah.
flavour of words. But I wrote a newspaper column that all the predominant flavours in the intro was all like a starter dish. The main body of the piece was like a main course, and the conclusion at the
That's
end was all
amazing.
sweet tastes. And I submitted that, and they never realised, and I got a really good thrill out of not actually knowing that was what it was. But again, it just makes synesthesia. It's playing around with your synesthesia. I think Sean mentioned something about that in the last meeting. Play around with it, have fun with it, and that's one of the ways I used to have fun with mine. I'd speak just in sweet tasting words or savoury words, depending on how I was feeling or what I wanted to convey.
James, thank you again so much. This has been another, I believe, fascinating episode of Chromatic Minds. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye
Yeah,
until then.
yeah. You take care.